Hi, this is Grandma here, and we're reading It's a Jungle Out There by Snell. And today we are reading chapter 15 called Yarinacocha to Tingo Maria. And I think by the picture, what can we assume? That maybe it's going to be a road trip and they're going to have car problems. We'll see. Kids, Dad announced one day at lunch at Yarinacocha, we've just gotten an answer to our prayers. We immediately all set about trying to determine which prayers he was talking about. There were the ongoing prayers for personal growth, and the ones about mashagingas with special struggles, and the one about an inexpensive way to get to Lima. Oh no, it's not some cheap way to get to Lima, is it? Sandy asked. They want us to take the Chevy carryall to Lima so it can be sold. They'll pay all the expenses. I told them we'd be glad to. Our hearts sank at yet another special provision. But that car always breaks down and it smells funny. How will we ever make it all the way to Lima? Terry blurted out, forgetting that this was an answer to a prayer. Terry was 12. I was 11, Sandy 8, and Melody 5. We were all old enough to know that this answer to our prayers was a bad deal. Any car in the jungle was a bad deal, and this one had been there 3 years. Just getting it over the road from Lima to the jungle had taken 10 years off its useful life. Keeping it there 3 years had taken another 10 off. Now that the carryall was decrepit and constantly breaking down light years away from the auto parts stores that it was addicted to, it was time to sell it. No one was quite sure if the green exterior was paint or mildew. The green interior was definitely mildew. There weren't many people who could take it to Lima. Of those who could, none would. The road was horrible. The thin air at the 16,500-foot pass would kill off the car and everyone in it. Landslides, broken down trucks would block the road. Only my dad thought all this sounded like a great way to save money. One of the problems with my family was that we could never turn down the opportunity to save money on a trip. Now, that simple philosophy would get us our first trip across the Andes and nearly cost us our lives. It was time for our second furlough, and although Dad and Mom were excited, the rest of us didn't look forward to it any more than we had our first furlough. And if you'll remember, that is like a break in what they are doing in Peru, and they go back to the United States, visit relatives, and spread the word of what they've done, sharing photos and stories, and getting funds in order to go back to continue. Still, our parents could hardly leave us with the Indians for a year, so they dragged us with them, figuratively kicking and screaming. Reminders of special treats like Dunkin' Donuts and TV shows like Hogan's Heroes, McHale's Navy, and Gilligan's Island failed to raise our enthusiasm. Packing for furlough was never fun and was certainly never a good way to begin a period of rest and relaxation. By the time we had ensured that stuff left behind wouldn't be eaten by termites, chewed by rats, rotted by mildew, or rusted from the oppressive humidity, we were all pretty tired, and the Chevy carryall was pretty full to the ceiling, in fact. Are you sure it's going to clear the rocks? A skeptical neighbor asked just before our departure. Designed for smooth U.S. highways, this glorified station wagon sagged rather badly. Its underside precariously close to things that stuck up in the road. On our road, anything that wasn't a hole was sticking up. Oh yeah, we heard Dad answer with wholehearted optimism. In spite of all evidence to the contrary, Dad still thought everything would turn out okay. All 6 of us plastered happy smiles over our tired and crabby faces as we pulled away from our jungle home. As usual, With life-threatening departures, many colleagues and friends were there to see us off. God bless you. We'll be praying for you. Have a good trip. God go with you. Of course, they were all glad they weren't going with us and probably immediately turned around and raised their hands to heaven, thanking God they were not in the car. We were all pretty sure we'd never see each other again, but no one said so. 3 of us sat in the front. That would have been Dad and Mom, and whoever was in the most immediate danger of either throwing up or getting thrown out a back window for being a pain. The other 3 had the back seat as we sped off at 10 miles an hour on the only road connecting Pucallpa to Lima. It stinks in here, we unanimously complained within minutes. Can we open the windows? Oh, if we open the windows, the car will fill with dust, Mom reasoned. We'll be filthy. The road was either slippery mud or choking dust. This being the beginning of the dry season, it was purely dust. If we don't open the windows, we'll be dead, argued Sandy without much exaggeration as we drove with the windows all wide open to cut down the heat, humidity, mildew spores, and engine fumes. Dust clouds boiled into the car and coated us from head to toe. Within 6 hours, every hair on our heads and our noses was dusty white and starch stiff. Now and then we'd pat the seats and raise little white puffs of dust just for a diversion. While we clambered out of the car for rest breaks, we looked like a host of ghosts. Driving this road required frequent rest breaks. It was made of rocks and crushed gravel, though that makes it sound smoother than it was. In a desperate fight to save the road from tropical downpours, the rocks had been hauled from the Aguaitia River and packed into the ever-shifting red clay. Driving on the boulders was about as pleasant as sitting on a jackhammer. Everything in the car, including our teeth and eyeballs, rattled and banged. Things under the car, probably including a few important things like the oil pan and the steerage linkage, scraped and crunched. The only thing fun about this trip was that we were going somewhere. For us, going somewhere glossed over most of the problems. We were going somewhere, that is, until we heard an abnormal clunk from the engine compartment, followed by ominous banging. Well, what do you suppose that was? Dad asked the steering wheel. There certainly wouldn't have been any point in asking us. It sounds like the engine falling out, said Sandy, with a notable lack of surprise in her voice. Well, I suppose I better take a quick peek. Dad reluctantly slowed us down from our top speed of 15 miles an hour and pulled over to the side so that we were only blocking 3/4 of the road. While the rest of us bushwhacked our way through the tall, chigger-infested roadside grass in search of private bushes to piddle behind, Dad opened the hood and searched among the problems for one that might be recent and worse than the rest. I think we've broken one of the engine mounts, he finally shouted to our various bushes. The engineers who designed them apparently thought they were working on a car. This was more like a bucking bronco with an engine in it. What does that mean? Mom said from behind a relatively simple bush. We were still a long way from Aguaitia, whose river had supplied the rocks that did us in. The dusty green jungle stretched flat and empty as far as our scratchy eyes could see. No auto parts stores, no rest areas, no nothing but thatched huts that didn't look as if they stocked engine mounts. Well, it means if another breaks, the engine really could fall out, Dad said matter-of-factly. It sounds more serious than he sounded, but there's nothing I can do about it here, so let's just keep going and pray that we make it to Aguaitia. Since this whole car was an answer to our prayers, prayers was rapidly losing its luster. Still, it didn't seem that only a miracle would get us to a shop. We had allowed some extra time for the trip in case of car trouble, but walking or hitchhiking the remaining 450 miles to Lima was out of the question. Aguatia would be far short of our goal for the day, but at least we might find a welder there. To our surprise, the remaining engine mount held fast through the final tortuous hours. Slowly, we gained altitude as we labored into the foothills of the Andes. The blazing red sun sank into the clay-white dust, first giving our world a reddish glow and then reducing it to two puny beams of light pointing out rocks, ruts, bumps, holes, and animals in front of us. We were numb. Finally, a long concrete bridge over the Rock Quarry River announced our arrival in Aguatia. It was our first smooth road since we'd left Yarinacocha 12 hours before. We wanted to drive back and forth just to feel it. In the diminished noise, we could almost hear each other shouting. Aguatia had been the first jungle headquarters for our linguistics team in Peru. The river was wide enough for float planes, though it took a bit of timing to get the plane up on step, under the bridge, and off the water between rapids. The old headquarters itself was a huge wooden house on a hill overlooking the town and the river. Unfortunately, our co-workers had long since moved out and turned the house back over to the government agency that had loaned it to us. We didn't know a soul in Aguatia. "Where are we going to stay?" one of us finally wondered out loud. There were no hotels or guest houses in the little town, and it was already past 10 o'clock. We were filthy and starved and exhausted. Mary and Joseph in a dying car. Fortunately, no one was pregnant. "Well, let's go ask at the old house," Dad suggested. It seemed like the only possibility, so he turned us off the main road and up the long, steep, rocky driveway to the top of the hill. He got out of the car, banged on the door until the caretaker woke up and opened it a crack. "Is there a chance you have room for us to spend the night?" "How many of you are there?" "Oh, my wife and I have 4 children. Our car broke down and we have no place to stay." It's hard to say what the caretaker thought he was seeing, but he didn't exactly fling the door open. Gringos weren't an everyday occurrence, especially in the middle of the night, and looking as if they had just been resurrected from the dust of the earth. On the other hand, Dad was making a pretty good case for mercy and compassion. "Look at my wife and little children," he pointed. "They're really tired." His wife immediately slunk down behind the seat so she couldn't be seen, and the children would not have reassured anyone. We were clearly desperate. Undoubtedly, against his better judgment and probably because he didn't have a stable to offer, the caretaker let us into the otherwise vacant house. We sprawled like wounded soldiers on musty beds or floors and immediately were oblivious to our troubles. Morning brought a splendid view of the river valley, a couple of boiled eggs apiece, and a welder with 2 teeth and a torch. Broken engine mounts, missing mufflers, and cracked axles kept his tin shack busy thriving. He was probably the only person around who hoped the road would never be paved. $1 later, he was done. By the time the engine mount was repaired to local standards, which meant we might be returning soon, we had swallowed our slippery eggs and saltine crackers and washed our faces. Full baths, we hoped, would be a luxurious treat at the tourist hotel in Tingo Maria at the end of the day. Slow learners that we were, we still had hopes for a better life. In high spirits, we piled in, encouraged to note that we couldn't hear any loud banging over the normal rattling and clanging. All things considered, the car was back to normal, which was nothing to sing about, but better than yesterday. Once past Aguatia, The road wound steadily upward through the luxurious jungle-covered mountains. Orchids hung from branches, ferns of all sizes covered the cliffs above and below the road. The air cooled perceptibly. Within a couple of hours, we entered the Bakirnan, a canyon of towering cliffs carved by raging, roaring, cascading river. In our high school years, this would become a favorite camping spot, but that's another story. The road was literally chiseled out of the cliffs and was so narrow that trucks with dual tires in the back sometimes had one tire hanging over space. In our case, all 4 tires stayed squarely on the road, but Mom's constant gasps and white-knuckled grip reminded us how close we all were to eternity. I still wonder why someone would hang on so tightly to something they were sure was on the verge of going over a cliff. On one side of the car, we could shamelessly pull 4-foot ferns off the canyon walls. On the other side, we could launch them into space and watch them drift into giant lazy circles until they landed in the foaming waters of the river. If Mom had been watching the ferns instead of the precipice, her whole outlook would have been much more peaceful. There were 2 long tunnels in the canyon. Just before the first one, we lurched to a halt behind a stalled truck. The driver and his helper were both squatting beside the back tires. "What's the problem?" Dad asked, leaning his head out the window. "It's too tall to go through the tunnel. We're letting some air out of the tires." Since we couldn't get past it, we hopped out for some lunch, some fern flying and some rock throwing. It would take a while for the driver to let enough air out and then refill the tires on the other side. In retrospect, this was probably the only part of the trip that we really enjoyed. Water cascaded down the sides of the canyons and waterfalls that ranged from angel hair mist to crashing torrents. Daily rains kept the whole canyon wet and luxuriously green. It even smelled green. Bright orange cock-o'-the-rocks made their nests in the crevices. Huge blue morpho butterflies flapped their wings in erratic paths. In the narrow window of the sky above us, the sun worked to take the chill off the mountain air. The only sounds were the river, the waterfalls, and the air hissing slowly out of the tires in front of us. Too soon, all good things must come to an end. Before we wished, we were back in the car and winding our way out of the canyon with horn blasts echoing off the walls at every turn. The narrow road and blind turns required advance notice that we were coming, and hopefully would keep us from getting pushed into the river by a drunken driver. They used to say that you had to be a little drunk to have the nerve to drive this section. Most were. Dad's arms spun first one direction, then the other, dodging holes, keeping us on the road. It wasn't long before we came across a truck with more than tire problems. Judging from bits and pieces spread on the ground, by skinning a little paint off the car, we could have gotten around, but the driver signaled us to stop. "Can you give me a ride to Tingo Maria? My transmission is broken." The driver was short, dark, covered with grease and dust. He'd feel right at home with us. "Sure," said Dad, always eager to help and well aware that we ourselves might soon be in the driver's shoes. "Get in the back with the kids." In the mid-afternoon, climbing over a high pass, the windows were closed against the cold, trapping engines and body fumes. Body parts, both ours and the car's, bounced and rattled interminably. Road grime poured through unseen gaps and filled our pores. Tight hairpin turns zigzagged us to the summit, and then down to the other side until finally closing in on Tingo. We could see a straight stretch at the end of the canyon. The stomach-churning curves were about to end. We had made it through the Bokiran and over the pass. Sighs of relief all around. Mom slackened her grip. Dad relaxed into the straightaway. "Hey!" Dad yelped as the car suddenly swerved to the right and directly for a roadside ditch. Then, "Oh no!" He whipped the steering wheel, but it no longer connected to anything. Mom gasped and locked onto her door handle. Our passenger in the back jerked upright and crossed himself. Only our slow speed and good brakes saved us. We screeched to a halt in a narrow patch of grass between the road and the ditch, got out slowly and began our habitual search for private bushes, while Dad once again crawled under the car. Our passenger was jabbering as if he had just come through a death and resurrection. "Oh, that was very lucky. This is a miracle. What would have happened if it had come loose back in the canyon? Dios mío, we are lucky. Dios mío, this was a miracle. Ay, Dios mío, thank you for the good luck." And on in a heartfelt mixture of theology and lucky coincidence. So, Dios mío, what do you think that means? It means my God. So he's saying, "Oh, God, thank you for the miracle." And that's part of the mixture of theology and lucky coincidence. Having our steering linkage hold together until the first straight stretch of the day was surely an act of God, and we all knew enough to be very grateful. Still, we had to figure out how to get the rest of the way to Tingo. Driving without an engine mount is pretty tame compared to driving without steering. Our dusty passenger saved us. Having spent his life fixing broken trucks in the middle of mountains and jungle, he immediately dived under the car. "Do you have any wire or rope?" His muffled voice came from just in front of the muffler. A quick search turned up nothing that could conceivably tie anything together. "How about a belt?" the muffled voice suggested to Dad. It wasn't designed to hold steering linkage together, but this come-along stranger was an old hand at improvisation. He set right to work, winding and twisting with his bare hands. When he was done, everything turned when it was supposed to and didn't when it wasn't, and we were off again, wondering just how durable the leather in the belt would be. What with the tunnel and steering setbacks, we were once again hopelessly behind schedule, but we still made it to Tingo in the daylight. In a rare fit of financial extravagance, we headed straight for the Hotel Turista, when we entered town at 4:30 in the afternoon. It wasn't exactly 5-star, but its rustic cabins stretched along a beautiful stream and were surrounded by lush tropical plants. When the doorman came to get our luggage, Mom hid behind the seat again. He was obviously trying to figure out how to carry our assorted boxes and bags without touching them. We spared him the dirty uniform by lifting them to our own shoulders and marching along behind his starched back. Within minutes, we were spread out, wading in the freezing shallow water, skipping rocks and soaking up the dwindling day. Within an hour, the sun would set. Cold would drop on us like a wet blanket, and we would head for the bliss of a hot meal and bath. In the end, of course, our hot meal was eaten with shaking spoons, and there was no hot bath. The showers offered only freezing cold water in cement shower stalls. The whole picturesque place went frigid after 6. "I don't feel that dirty," volunteered Dad. "I think I'll just wash my face and go to bed." Mom followed with a murmur, and the rest of us, having long since acclimated to the jungle's humid heat, decided on the spot that we felt cleaner than we originally thought. In no time, we had tucked ourselves in against the worsening cold. Some of us slept. Mom lay awake most of the night, listening to the babbling stream, shivering, and wondering about the rest of the trip. Her confidence in our ability to survive hadn't been greatly enhanced by the first 2 days. So that's the end of chapter 15, and chapter 16 is the rest of the journey because its title is Tingo Maria to Lima. And we can already see what they're going to have ahead on the road. It's a herd of llamas. I bet you've never seen a herd of llamas. I sure haven't. Okay, bye-bye.